So the theme for tonight's talk is becoming whole. W-H-O-L-E. And it's a pretty deep topic. And when you look at the Buddhist practices, the Noble Eightfold Path, all the teachings that the Buddha gave was pointing for us at how to become whole, right? So then the first question becomes, well, what does it mean to become whole, right? And the way that I look at becoming whole is that there's no part of ourselves left out. There's no part of ourselves that we have abandoned, that we haven't seen, that we're not seeing clearly, that we have pushed away, or that we're clinging on to, or over-identifying with as who we are. That this whole being is a free-flowing entity, that just like plants and lungs and everything can take in information and take in experience and then breathe out the wastes that are coming, that need to be let go of. So there's this free-flowing of receiving and taking in and then giving out, generosity with our giving out. In Buddhism, we're taught that we all have Buddha nature, and that we already have this beautiful Buddha nature, and that it's just a matter of realizing it and uncovering this Buddha nature, to connecting with it and living from it. But in order to get to the Buddha nature, we have to get through, guess what nature?
Human nature.
Right? The human nature. Because the human nature stands in the way of us realizing or connecting with our Buddha nature. So the human nature will actually either support us in fully connecting with our Buddha nature, or it will stop us from fully connecting with our Buddha nature. So that's what we're going to be as a group talking about tonight after I say a few things about this. You know, and in the middle of all this becoming whole, right, what are we hearing about in our society? A few weeks ago, someone decided to start shooting people in Las Vegas and killed 50-some people. Just this huge massacre. And the heart really aches when it hears about the pain and sorrow of something. Not only the people who are hurt, but for our whole society, and for the person who is so lost that they can act out with so much pain. And then we hear about this week how someone walked into a church in Texas and killed children, little children, and everyone, 20-some people there too. So it's clear that our society is far from being whole, that there are a lot of holes in our culture, right? So part of our process of becoming whole is going to include looking at how we relate to our conditioning from our culture, right? Last week I talked a lot about being a female, gender equality, and sexual harassment, and how it's just so prevalent in our society that a lot of times we don't even see it because it's part of the waters that we're swimming in. And then there are all these other undercurrents that we need to come to terms with if we're going to become whole. We need to look at our relationship, how we're holding ourselves, how we're responding and reacting and being delusional or ignorant, not seeing certain aspects of ourselves, and in our gender roles that we were talking about before. Last week I think we talked about how women are tend to be conditioned and raised, at least in my generation, to be what? Remember? Nurturing,
Nice.
nice, sweet, huh?
Subservient.
Subservient, helpful, happy, right? Sometimes even weak. But then I didn't talk about men in our culture. What's some of the undercurrents, the conditioning that affects a lot of men in our culture?
The opposite of all those you just mentioned.
Right. Not supposed to like show your emotions.
So supposed to hide your emotions,
Be
suppress
aggressive.
them, be aggressive, successful, right? Anything else? Strong, intelligent,
Independent.
independent
Leaders.
leaders. Yeah. So there are all these beliefs and undercurrents for males and females, right? And then if you're a person of color, boy, they really have to deal with so much conditioning that's put onto them, as far as that they're not worthy, that they're not part of the mainstream culture, that they're ignored, that they're not included or looked at for leadership roles. They're dealing with a lot of undercurrents of racism and not having privilege. I had a few women in my last teacher training program, who were in wheelchairs because they were large and they couldn't walk well because they were large. And the pain and the hurt that they spoke from, how they get treated by mainstream society because they're big. That they're treated, people ignore them, they don't see them, or they come right out and give them dirty looks, or judge them, or point and laugh, or get ridiculed. And I think last week I started to point at all the underprivileged groups, LGBTQ groups, and now, different religious groups, and a lot of anti-Semitism and things are coming back. So these are all the waters that we're swimming in that we need to really look at. We need to look at our relationship with them, how we're expressing or supporting them by not addressing them, right? So all those things are going to help us become whole. And of course, the whole Buddhist path is about training the mind to let go and become whole. And the letting go one, you may know this story, but it's one of my favorite stories about letting go. The woman, the parable of the mustard seed, where she really wanted to be married, and she finally met this wonderful man, and she couldn't wait to have a baby. And they had this wonderful baby, and she was finally happy and complete because she had what she always wanted, this wonderful little baby. And then one day she went to pick up her baby, it was quiet, and it was dead. And she was beside herself. She just could not accept that her baby was dead. So she was running around looking for someone to heal her baby, her dead baby. And for days, she's running around with this dead baby in her arms, trying to get someone to bring her baby back to life. And then someone said of the Buddha, if anyone could bring your baby back to life, it would be him, this holy man. So she went to him and she said, please bring my baby back. Can you bring my baby back? And he said, I'll tell you what, you go to a house and find a house and get a mustard seed from this house that has had no loss. And then I'll bring your baby back. Right? So if you know the story, if you can imagine that every house she went to, everyone had mustard seeds, but nobody had a house where they hadn't experienced loss of some kind. Right? So loss is such a normal part of our lives, and we just discussed this book last night, Die Wise, and yet there's all this denial about death. We are a death-phobic culture. right? So that's part of our becoming whole, would be practicing dying. Realizing how we're dying. We're already dying. Realizing little deaths that happen every day. Every little loss that we have. Can we open to the losses to the same degree that we can open to the gifts and the new things? Because that's going to require, we have to be able to, this is part of that flow I was talking about, right? In order to become whole, we have to be this vessel that can flow in and out. And anything that stops this flow, like denial of our own death or fear of death, or these are the things that we need to turn around and look at. Right? Anything that stops us from flowing and being whole, anything we want to push away, reject, our ego gets really identified with things and gets angry or hurt or frustrated. Here's an invitation. It may be really not pleasant, but it's an invitation to say, okay, what is it that I need to look at? What is it that I need to hold? What is it that I need to uncover, be with, be patient and kind with, be compassionate towards? What needs to be healed, seen, felt, touched today, right? And the more we do this within ourselves, the more whole we become, and then the more compassion we develop, the bigger our heart encompasses the whole world, and then the more we're able to be that stand for other people in the world. But oftentimes it requires that the rug gets pulled out from under us. Has anybody here feel like the rug has ever been pulled out from under them? No, yeah? Today maybe? This past week? Right? So we have to be willing to be uncomfortable. Really. I think this whole practice is about willing to be uncomfortable from time to time. Right? There's joy, there's peace, there's beauty, there's a lot of great merit and benefits that come from this practice. But that merit and the benefits are not going to come unless we're willing to be uncomfortable. Unless we're willing to go to the dark, the heavy, the difficult places. To see what we need to open our hearts to. There was, I've been doing this practice for about 20 years. And it was clear that my marriage was not working out. And I had to leave. And we co-owned a business together. So when I left the marriage, I left my husband of 9 years. I left my business that we had built together, a very successful business. I had left my way of earning income, so I had no job. I left my stepson, who I had raised for 9 years, and I loved with all my heart. So I left my possessions, home, everything. And wow, talk about the rug being pulled out. It was so difficult. But it was wonderful too, because what was left? I had nothing left, absolutely nothing left, but I had the juice, the raw materials from 20 years of deep practice of turning towards the pain, turning towards the beauty, turning towards the difficult, turning towards the joy. And that groundless support was there, was like the parachute that I needed in order to get me through the not having anything. And not knowing what was going to happen. Right? So the whole thing was really strange. That situation is what brought me to be a Dharma teacher. Because it was during that time when I didn't know what I was going to do, and I had a meditation group at my last business that we co-owned, that people asked me to start teaching this group, this sitting group that I was going to. They said, can you lead the sitting group? Can you take over the sit? Can you give us teaching? So it kind of, that part of my life closed off and fell totally apart. The rug was totally pulled out so that this could emerge right here. And this was the one and only thing I'd ever been really passionate about my whole life. You know, I could do all the other making money and paying the bills and going through the motions, but this was the one area where I was most passionate. So I had to be willing to let my whole world fall apart. So I'm not saying that you need to go and leave your spouse and, you know, your whole world needs to fall apart, but you have to be willing to allow your world to fall apart, right? It won't necessarily do that, but life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you so that you can learn and grow and see the next level, the next layer that needs to be healed or to be looked at as part of the human nature. And then when you heal that next layer, that next level, then Buddha nature arises at a deeper and more profound level. And it's so much more nurturing and supportive, and the fullness of the presence of our Buddha nature. The words, there aren't words to describe it. And to think that we're trying to use all the material realm and relationships and all this stuff to get all of that, you know, to fill that void, what can't be filled through human relationships in nature. They can only point us towards this Buddha nature that's within here, right? So we work skillfully, ethically in our relationships and in our practice. We work diligently. We meditate regularly so that we can uncover, work with, turn towards, and trust the process. It's amazing. You know, if we're sick, what happens? We lay down, right? We lay down, we rest, we take medicine. It's the same thing with our spiritual practice. There's a wisdom that's beyond our intellectual understanding of the healing process. So it's just a few, there's so much more. And I could talk for hours on this, but I won't, because I think it's important to open this up to the group and to, if you have any questions, please ask any of your questions. And or if you want to share what helps you to be whole or to work with some of our own conditioning that has held us back in our lives, or your challenged areas that you're really focusing on cultivating or working through right now, or whatever comes up with you around this whole concept of wholeness. So I'll just remind us all to please be brief and try to stay out of going into long narrative stories. And stick to what's personal for us, first person I statements, if it's not a question. Yeah, so let's open it up to the wisdom of the group.